Okay, good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Patent Math Conference in this particular session, entitled Increasing Math Engagement. My name is Bob Shields, joined by my colleague, Ms. Allison Moyer. Before we start, I just want to remind you that if you are using the SCED app, the announcements for this conference are under the Info tab. All announcements for today are also on the conference website, as well as the presenter bios and handouts. So we won't be reading those. We're going to drop the link to that in the chat for you. Please note that not all sessions have handouts. To enable closed captioning, there is a CC icon at the bottom of the toolbar. If you click on the CC icon, it will enable closed captioning. It is now my pleasure to introduce Ms. Dr. Elizabeth Hughes. And without further ado, we will pass it over. She will share her screen. And thank you again for being here.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank everybody for joining me this Tuesday morning so that we can talk about engagement and how to engage students in secondary level mathematics classes. So I'm going to make sure, there we go. Just a little bit about myself. You can see some things here. I am currently an associate professor of special education at Penn State. I am located in State College right now. I love doing things about math and talking about math and research about math and how we engage students. Yes, we are. And so I'm so happy to share this with you today. My two flexes on this slide are that, number one, I am a parent of a child with disabilities, with twice exceptionality, reading disability, and giftedness in mathematics. I'm an aunt of a child who has a disability, and I am an advocate for individuals with diverse learning needs. And then my second flex is that I substitute. So when Penn State is out of session, I go into the classroom and sub in my local school district so that I can stay connected to the classroom, what's happening in the classroom, and what the logistics are really in education. So I'm not just in my ivory tower over here. I see I have a Boston College person too. Yay. So few of those around here. Thank you, those of you who are already using the chat. Please feel free to put things in the chat. I will be watching the chat, and I will have certain questions that I will ask you to kind of dump some information there so that we have an intimate group of about 140 of us. And so this is going to be my first chat dump. If you could please, well, your name's on there, so you don't really have to share your name. But if you could tell us your location, which part of the state are you from? Are you from outside the state? And what grade level or what role you have in teaching mathematics, what content you're teaching mathematics, any of that, just so that we can see the range and diversity of participants that are here today. Okay, and this gives me a little help too, because I can kind of try to make connections. Awesome. Okay. Very good. Thank you for dropping that in there. So the first few slides here I have are going to be really just kind of setting this groundwork so that we're all in similar places. I have created this presentation so that we have wherever you are, whatever level you are, and I still see some things coming in, whatever you're teaching, however long you've been teaching, you should be able to access something in the presentation. There's some things, the fact that you're here on a Tuesday morning talking about engagement lets me know that you're probably already doing some of these things in your classroom. So you may be like, yeah, great, I'm doing some of these things, or here's maybe a different twist on something that I'm doing. Or there, you might find something that you haven't done. You can be like, I can try this. So I've tried to create it so that everybody can get something out of this. And I also try to create it so that it's really easy to implement. Like if school is still in session, you could go in tomorrow and try something. Okay. So the three assumptions I have on here, and I just kind of want this to be lay the groundwork. Is the first is that all students have capacity, have strengths that they bring into the classroom in their learning. So kind of recognizing and honoring that students are different, that we have diverse students in many different ways, and they're all bringing in their learned experiences into the classroom. So building from that, building engagement within that. The second assumption is that students need to be engaged in order to learn. Okay, so they need to be interacting with it. I kind of think of it as mental Velcro. So the more mental Velcro we have, the more we're making connections, the more we're helping students make connections, the greater that it's going to stick, and they're going to be able to really learn that and apply that later. And then the third thing is we can't control everything in the classroom. We can't really control students' behaviors, but we can control our own actions, and we can create an environment that encourages engagement. So some of the times I get the questions, well, how do you get kids to turn in their homework? Like, it's like, okay, I can't force anybody to turn in their homework, but I can set up the conditions in such a way that they may want to. And so that's really what we're focusing on today. Like what can you do to increase engagement? Okay. And just as I said, I try to create this presentation with lots of different access points. So wherever you are in teaching, instruction, or coaching, you can take something away from it. We need to think too about our students, and our students have their kind of just right level at which they are engaging in mathematics. After COVID, when I talk to teachers, they say that students are there's greater diversity in the prerequisite knowledge that students are coming into the class. And there's different gaps, but different students may have different gaps from when they were absent or out or sick, or there was an interruption in lessons. So we're at this time where we have students that may be coming with different amounts of information that we're used to. Okay, so the things that I'm going to share with you today about engagement are really going to help you not only engage the students and get them interacting with the lesson, but also give you real-time information to make real-time data-driven decisions. Excellent. I love that I have some special ed folks here too. So this is, if you're familiar with UDL, I'm just kind of throwing this out here. This is not a UDL presentation, but I really like how they kind of show these two average students that had different levels in different areas and different strengths and different challenges. So even though they're kind of falling in that average level, when you really look at the skills, the factors that they're bringing into the classroom and into learning, that background knowledge, it's going to be different. Okay, which makes engagement even more important because you'll be able to kind of see these elements happening. Okay. The last, and this will kind of follow a few slides, but the last thing I want to consider with learning diversity and readiness within this classroom, within each classroom, is that different students are going to be at different levels of learning for different skills. Within the same classroom, you're going to have students that are just working on that acquisition. You're going to have students that have a little more understanding of it. Students have a lot of understanding, and students who may already understand it or may pick it up very quickly. Okay, so you have students all along this spectrum. And we want to make sure that no matter where students are in the spectrum, they can participate and access and share information. Okay, I love this little cartoon here. I try to throw cartoons into everything. So about, class participation and how we're really looking at student engagement in class. Okay. So this is I think the last slide that shows where we are with student diversity in the classroom. And this one also kind of hooks into instruction and where instruction lies and how maybe explicit, or if you're doing more constructivist, if students have already mastered it and they're doing independent work, where students fall on this level. And I know I've looked at the other presentations. There's going to be so many presentations that really delve into this aspect of it. So I will not. So the purpose of that was just to kind of set the groundwork. Okay. Recognizing that you have diverse classrooms, that students within your class are bringing different strengths, different challenges. There may be gaps in interrupted education. So I want you to think about, as students come into your classroom, in a typical lesson, how do you engage students? How do you engage students with the content, with the concepts? Please drop this in the chat. Okay. Give about a minute think time. I see some things already that we're going to talk about. Excellent. Okay. Excellent. Great. So the things that I'm seeing coming in the chat look wonderful, look fabulous. I recommend take a look at that. I only have an hour and 15 minutes with you, and right now we're down to an hour. So we're not going to be able to do all of that. Yeah, Kay Lawson, I'm going to share some of those things. But we're going to do some of those. We're going to delve into some of those. Okay. Some of the things that I'm loving that I'm seeing is that you're using real world examples and authentic examples. It looks like you're making those connections, and you have kind of like little Quizlet games. We can talk about that because there are so many different platforms out there to use, and I think they have different strengths and limitations. So I'd love to, and feel free to drop those in the chat. We're learning as an environment and as a community here. Okay. Excellent. Great. I love these. So this is what we're going to work on today, or this is what I'm going to cover today. As these 5 ways to increase engagement. Okay. The first is going to be synchronized and asynchronous responses. Okay. I love this one. I need to change my chat or move my chat so I can see things better. Okay. I love this first one because you can use it to make data-driven decisions, and you can use the tools that you have. And really, this can be used at all levels. Okay. So the first, visual synchronized responses. This is effective for the whole group. It is best for short or discrete responses. So many of you talked about using whiteboards. And I use these all the time, these little pocket folders. This one you can see I was using, it has a heuristic on it, and I was using it with schema-based instructions with 3rd graders. Okay. You can have students complete worksheets on them. We do graphs, we do schema, and sometimes it's blank. Okay. I've used these with my college students. I've used them with 3rd graders and everyone in between. I'm going to have a pause second here because I want you to think. For visualized synchronized responses, what essentially is happening here is you are having students respond to a question. On the previous slide, I said using a discrete question or something that has a short answer is probably best for this. How you would do this in class is, because it is synchronized, you are looking for all of the responses at the same time. So you may be doing your modeling at the board, and modeling is not just I talk as the teacher. Okay, and you listen and listen and listen. Modeling is really like, I'm sharing something, I'm checking in to make sure that you're understanding it. I'm sharing another chunk and I'm checking in. It's really this conversation and this dialogue that is the teacher kind of prompting and then students responding. So this is a great way to model, or to tag that into modeling. Okay. It could be simply, what is, you're doing long division and you get to a step and the subtraction. Okay, what is this minus this? Students are responding. Okay, you're checking to make sure they're paying attention, they're listening, but also giving them little time to practice mathematics. Okay. I worked with, and I know I have some high school teachers on here, and I worked with high school teachers across Pennsylvania and in New Jersey. And just recently with coaching, one of the high school teachers was like, Elizabeth, it's like, you told us to use these whiteboards, and I was really skeptical. He's like, my high school students are not going to want to write on whiteboards. But he was like, you suggested it. I decided to try to do it. And then he said, not only did they love using them, but they wanted to use them more often. So now it is just part of his routine that he has them available. Students can use them. Then that's more for asynchronous. But he said students, when he started using these, were more engaged. They were participating more, and their test scores went up. Their grades increased because they were involved more in the instruction and because they had this. Now, it could just be the novelty. What's the difference on writing on a piece of paper versus writing on this? Could be the novelty of it, but he was skeptical, and he saw the benefit of it in what the students were learning. I love that Jamie just said, oh yes, these are dry erase sleeves, sorry. And Jamie just shared that if you don't have the fancy ones, you can just use those plastic sleeves. And I don't know if you're on Facebook and you're on like a buy nothing group, but I'm sure you can ask people if they have them, or if any offices, I'm sure businesses and offices have them that are willing to give them up. So thank you. Yes, you can also use whiteboards, or I know some people have gotten big whiteboards and like cut them down into size. There's lots of different ways that you can do this inexpensively. Excellent. Oh, there we go. So Kara K. Cattleco said she or he or they use them with formulas with the inserts and love it. Excellent. What's nice about, thank you. What's nice about these visual synchronized responses is you can make changes based on what students are doing. Okay. If all the students are getting it correct, if all students are paying attention, you can move on at that quick pace. If there are some errors, that might be hey, I'm going to pause and I'm going to reteach this. Or I'm going to pause and I'm going to give more examples or more non-examples. Or I'm going to divide the class and work with students in small group, and then have students that can continue on do that. So there's so many ways to use this. If you are on here and you use these and there's something that just stands out, or a great way to do it, or a link you have, feel free to drop it in the chat so you can help and support your fellow educators on here. Okay. I'm going to move on, but please feel free to keep sharing in the chat. Okay. Here are just some examples that I've had for these discrete ones. You can show this, and X is greater than what? Students have to solve it. They share their response with you. You know immediately if they get it correct. Okay. This is, I think this can replace, because we talk about like replacing behavior sometimes. I see this as replacing walking around and checking student work. Okay, or when you're in the class and you're trying to see if students get it, or sometimes like students will, if you ask for the response, you're like, what is X? And you hear some students, we tend to hear the same students. And then some students may just be like, So this allows you to actually see it and make sure that everybody is participating. Okay. Here's another way that you can do it. It's missing a step. Here's another way you can graph. Here we've taken a kind of more complicated problem and just made it into, is it A or B? Okay. Something like this, what fraction is the greatest? You have different fractions there and they can just tell you what letter. Again, you're just scanning, you're just checking. Okay. Benefits of this, everyone's answering. It allows you to see all of the responses. Nobody can like cower, but it also kind of helps students that they may not want to speak out. They may not want to share, but you still want to know what's going on. If you don't have response boards, I'm going to go back a slide actually. If you do something like that, which fraction is greater, and you have multiple choice, you can use sign language. Okay, is it A, B, or C? Again, some students may be like raising their hand, it's A. Some students may just like this. Some students may just be like, may just kind of keep it close to their chest. Okay, they don't want other people to see, but they're still sharing their response with you. I have, I should have put this example in here. I was in a class, I was in an algebra class, and we were talking about parabolas and kind of changing the parabolas so they kind of move or change directions or wider or narrower. And so the teacher had different equations. He's like, okay, if we do this, what happens? And so, and students were raising their hand and he's calling on them one at a time. And I said, okay, can I jump in for a second? Let me try something. And I made everyone stand up, all the students stand up and make parabolas. I'm just trying to keep it on the screen here, but like they did parabolas with their arms. And then I put a new equation on the board and they had to change their gestures based on what was happening in the equation. Okay. It was kind of goofy. It was kind of silly. These are freshmen, but everyone did it. And I was able to tell who was doing it. Okay. So there's lots of ways that you can adapt this as well. And it doesn't really have to cost anything. Yeah. On the bottom here, I just have kind of those self questions that you're going to be asking, those reflection questions. I'm doing this. Well, how does this inform my instruction? Okay. It tells you how many students are getting it correct, if you need to reteach, if you need to do small groups, any of those kind of things. And you should have these slides so you can kind of think about this as well going on. Okay. The next I have for you is visual asynchronous responses. Okay. And this really replaces walking around and checking student work. Okay. I've observed and visited many classes where when students start working on independent work, they're working at their desk and the teacher is walking around and checking and providing feedback. Okay. And I love that the teacher is walking around, and I love that if a student is having difficulty, they're helping. But one of the weaknesses of that is you're really only able to focus on one student at one time. So I introduced this, and the students did their work, but they did it on the whiteboards again, or the sleeves. When they were done with their problem, they held up their answer. If the teacher is working with one student and helping one student work through a problem, the teacher can look up and see wherever everyone else is and say, okay, like you got it, move on to the next one, move on to the next one, move on to the next one. So you're really able to check in with more people across a larger area without having to walk around and check each person individually. for the visual asynchronous responses, I really see that benefit, as this is when students are doing small group or independent work, and some are ready to move on at a faster pace. Some you may need to pull aside and help and reteach, but you're really able to check in with all students during this time. Okay. I'm going to pause for a second. Questions, comments, thoughts, concerns about either synchronous or asynchronous visual responses? Okay. The next activity I'm going to share is engaging through peer and group responses. I'm sure we've all been in that position where we are talking about a concept and we're explaining it and we're explaining it and we're explaining it, and the students kind of aren't getting it. And then like a peer or a friend tells them and they're like, oh yeah, I get it. And you're like, that's exactly what I said. But sometimes it helps to hear it from a peer. Okay, they're hearing it from somebody else. It may be a slightly different use of language. It may just be that this is the 10th time they've heard it and that's the time it stuck. But getting students to talk about mathematics and talk to each other and even write about mathematics, which I will be talking about after lunch, are all great ways to increase engagement. Okay. Now, sometimes I go into classrooms, especially high school classrooms. I'm going to call you out on this. And students are sitting in rows and they're just listening and copying notes. Okay. If that is your style and you're like, whoa, I cannot jump to peer and group responses quite yet, I'll ask you to maybe kind of just push yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit and maybe just have a little bit of time for think, pair, share. You've taken these notes. I want you to look at your notes, share your notes with somebody, and then call on people. Okay. But the activity that I'm going to really kind of go into more detail with. Oh, good question, Ramona. I am going to flip to the next slide because, and I will repeat that question as well. So, sorry. Next slide, Ramona. That's what I'll think about, or that's when I'll address your question. When it comes to grouping, I want you to think about, and you do not need to type this into the chat. This is more, unless you have something that like absolutely positively works. This is something that is kind of more of a self-reflection. Okay. So what are you doing? What works for you? And what are your challenges? Okay. And this goes into the question I had. What about the students that are just copying off of each other? And the answers are incorrect. Okay. What can you do to do that? What can you do to keep students on task? Good. So what do we do when students are just copying? And again, this kind of goes back to like, we can set up the environment to support student learning, but at the end of the day, you may still have a student that is doing that. We can only control our behaviors, but we can really make an effort to set up the environment so that successful learning happens. Okay. About 30 more seconds just to think. If you're done thinking, just take a deep breath. Okay. Types of grouping. Oh, thank you, J. Miller. I like that. First is, let's talk about student choice, because this is what the students always want to do. They want to pick their bestie, okay? And that's who they want to work with. Something you can do when you have student choice, because sometimes student choice is important, like it boosts their interest. Let them do student choice every now and then, but also kind of talking to students about when having student choice, what do you look for in a partner? How is your partner going to help you learn the content? How is your partner, are you going to get in trouble because you've picked that partner because you're going to get off task? Or is it a partner that you work well with? Okay. So you can really talk about like, who are you picking as a partner and why? You can also add like little rules sometimes, or like little parameters to it. So the besties aren't always together, but it could be pick a person wearing the same color shirt, a different color shirt, any of those sort of things. Good. Somebody has a clock to pick partners. Excellent. I love that you're sharing these ideas, and share the ideas at work. And if there's an idea that didn't work, you can be like, I tried this, it was awful. Homogeneous groups. Okay, so these students have like similar ability levels. The benefits are you can differentiate work. So if group A is really at this readiness, and think about that readiness continuum, they're still at that acquisition phase, you can be working with them a little bit more at that acquisition phase. Whereas group B, maybe more at that independent phase, moving towards generalization, they can be working more independently. So it's nice to have these homogeneous groups when you really want to change the content. I shouldn't say change, because this is not, because we're all working to the same standards, but you want to differentiate the content. Okay. The other you have is heterogeneous groups, or different ability groups. A benefit from this is that the peers can support each other. But this is where I would kind of give a little bit of advice based on research that the Fuchs have done out of PALS and peer-assisted learning strategies, is make them near peers. So it's not, this is your strongest person with the person that needs the most support in this area. Okay, chances are they're going to get frustrated with each other and clash. But if you have 10 students and this is not a perfect science, but you're like, okay, these students are strong, 1, 2, 3, and you kind of go down the list, and then you cut that list in half and you put them together. So if there's 10 students, student number 1 is working with student number 6. Student number 2 is working with student number 7. Student number 3 is working with student number 8. So you have still these kind of different readiness and different skills grouping, but they're near peers. Okay. Again, having near peers and things like that research shows it benefits both the student that is stronger in that skill and the student that is weaker in that skill. Okay. Other things to consider when grouping: knowing your students, that goes into kind of which groups you're choosing for that day. Assigning roles. So is somebody the yes to the near peers? Thank you, Kate. Is somebody the note taker? And somebody is the leader to make sure that you stay on task, and somebody else is the reporter who's going to share out the information. So that you could have it so that students have different roles. Okay. And then each time those roles may shift and change. The other thing I would consider is teaching how to work in a group. Okay, especially at kind of middle and high school, we just assume like the students are coming to us, they know how to do group work, but they may not. Especially, and I hate to always come back to COVID, but all of our students have had interrupted social learning. So yes, coach and player. So they may not know how to work in a group. Assigning the roles, or if you're doing a dyad where there's 2 students, one is the coach, one is the player, The stronger, if you're doing that, if you're having two people work together and you have a coach and the player, your stronger student is going to be the coach first, and then they switch. Okay, because the coach kind of gives a little more of that instructional element. Okay, heads together. This is a fun one. I actually love this. I do this with my college students when we talk about this, or when we talk about grouping and we apply this. Okay, so heads together, there are 4, although that's not a hard enough, like it can be as many as you want. It can be 3, it can be 2 is probably too few. It could be like 3, it could be 5, anywhere within there. Okay, so you create groups. Going back to the why we create groups, how you create groups, you can create them however you want. I would probably make these heterogeneous groups. Each group has a letter. You can change it. Each group can have an animal. Each group can have a sports team. Each group can have it doesn't matter. Do what your students are interested in. But each group has a heading. And then each member of that group has a number. Okay. You'll ask an open question. What do I mean by open question? I mean, it's not just going to be, what is 2 + 2? And they have to find the answer. But it could be, how are fractions related to division? Why might, how are, like, what are reciprocals? What are reciprocals? Why is it easier to kind of understand maybe reciprocals with addition, subtraction than it is square root and squares? Okay, something like that, that different students can engage in different ways. Why do we multiply here? Or what is the relationship between multiplication and addition? Any sort of things, okay? And then you allow time for them to discuss. And this is going to go back to Ramona, your question about, well, what about students that just like write down the answer? Because these open questions don't have a exact answer, you can't just copy the answer down. And in the purpose of heads together, the group, because you teach them, has to know that each group member is responsible for the information. Okay, so you're not just going to have one person be like, okay, this is the answer, we're done. The group needs to make sure that everybody understands it and can explain it, because they don't know who you're going to call on. You can know who you're going to call on, but they don't know who you're going to call on. So you would then call the group number or the group letter and the number, and they have to share their response for their group. Okay, this is what it may look like. Again, you can use any sort of group animals, but we have here group A, group B, group C, group D. So I ask a question. It's a question that they can really talk about and discuss. It's a question that everybody can add a piece, even if they've kind of already mastered this or they're still learning this in the acquisition phase. And they discuss it. You then say, okay, C2, can you share what your group talked about? Okay, because the group doesn't know who's going to be called on. They have to make sure everybody can share. This has kind of layers of accountability to it. You can make this into a game. You can make this into a competition. You can just make this as a standard rule of discussion in the class. Okay. Here's some examples of open-ended questions. What do you notice about the graph? See how that like anybody can share something about that. So your students who are really kind of struggling with this information, they can still make observations. Students that haven't mastered, they may be more detailed in their responses, but everybody can contribute. And then the group needs to make sure that everybody is able to kind of understand enough to share out. Okay. Evaluate this writing sample. Okay. Why do we need the same denominators to add fractions but not multiply fractions? What is an inequality? I'm going to give you about a minute think time. And what I want you to, if you're willing to share, think about some open-ended questions that you could use in your classroom. And if you have any good open-ended questions, drop them in the chat with maybe what topic it is. Okay. Or if, evaluate this writing sample that can be used for any level. But if you have something that's specific to geometry or algebra or fractions. And think about too, how do these questions relate to really understanding the concepts of mathematics? I like that. Why is a line plot better than a list of scores? That in the writing, when I'm going to do later on, one of the things we talk about are representations. Like, two people drew a picture to represent this word problem. Which one's better? Why? Awesome. Excellent. Okay. Good. I'll let you keep adding those. Good. Excellent. With the other, when do we estimate? Why is estimating important? When is it maybe better to estimate than to find the exact answer? When is it better to find the exact answer, the exact number than it is to estimate? Love these. Oh my gosh, I love these. I'm glad this chat's going to be saved because I'm going to be writing some of these down. Why aren't all quadrilaterals also parallelograms? And you know what you could do too, like with the examples of these questions. Oh my gosh, first of all, we can go back and use these. Students can draw pictures. They're using their words, their terminology, their vocabulary, visual expression of what's happening. Awesome. I love these. Okay. Oh, what graphs are better? Statistics. I think everybody should learn statistics. That's just my little thing. Okay. The next thing I'm going to talk about is note taking. Okay. And this is a fun one. And I am aware that we only have half an hour left. Note taking is such an interesting topic, I think. And there's research that shows that students who take notes tend to perform better than students who do not take notes. Okay. So what does this mean to us as educators as we're talking about engaging students in math classrooms, in math practices? Well, number one, we need to teach students how to take notes. Okay, we can't just assume that students know how to take notes. Okay, so the style of notes that you use may change. How students take notes may change. And I would say that after you teach students how to take notes, let students adapt it to their own likes and interests. Okay. I always get, is it better to take notes like handwritten notes or to type out notes? Research, I think, tends to lean slightly more towards those handwritten notes. There's something about writing that kind of makes those connections. Thank you, Mary. Something about making those connections. You're engaging in a different way. But if you're typing, you're able to edit and add more. Unless you take notes like I do and I start linear and I'm like, okay, this is it. And then I start having like pictures and diagrams and arrows and color coordinating and all that kind of stuff. But that's what makes sense for me. Okay. Note taking, I will say, please, please, please should not just be, I'm going to talk and you're going to write down everything that I do. Or if I write it on the board, you're going to write it down. We still need those opportunities to stop, reflect, connect, pause, think, all of those things. One thing you can do, especially for students for whom writing is not their forte, who may have motor challenges or processing challenges. Hey, Shelby. They you can do guided notes. I use guided notes with my students at Penn State as well. Okay, and I'm going to show you lots of examples of those. Okay, and then another thing I'm going to kind of toss in here with note taking, because I think we get, and I am guilty of this as well, I get so into, okay, take notes, do you get the notes? But pausing and giving students time to stop, reread what they wrote, share with a peer. Okay, see if what you have matches what the instructor did, and not just assume that students are going to do these things, but really provide that time, that space, that instruction to do it. Okay. So, guided notes. I love guided notes. Oh, and I'm actually going to pause here because these notes, especially the ones on the right-hand side of the screen, not the clouds one, but the other ones. These are I got from a podcast about note-taking, and I play it for my undergraduate and graduate students at the beginning of the semester. And it talks about the importance of note-taking, and it talks about kind of the importance as the note taker to be investing in your note taking. So when you try to get buy-in with students, I have them listen to it so that they can hear about the importance of note taking and hopefully kind of want to take notes there. Excellent. I love how folks are dropping in the note taking. Yeah, Samantha, I will make sure I definitely do that. Note taking, but I will say, and like with not all note taking is the same. And I think we really, if we could be purposeful with intent with when and how we use notes, that'd be great. Okay. And another thing you can differentiate guide notes. I did this with my 4th grade classroom. I had 3 sets of every guided notes. Some of it was, they had a lot more blanks and certain students got those. My students who had IEPs with goals in writing, or maybe had more challenges with that motor control or that processing speed, they had fewer elements to fill in, but it was really the most important information that I wanted them to focus on and connect. Okay. So you can see here examples of guided notes. There's lots of different ways that you can do this. I've worked with one of the school districts I worked with in New Jersey. This is one of the first things I showed them. One of the teachers, they started putting all their notes into guided notes. You should have access to my PowerPoint, but I will share the podcast as a link. And loved it. She absolutely loved doing the guided notes. And this was for high school. Okay. Here are some guided notes that I used for my intro to special ed class. So with this one, there were different links and stuff too, that you would watch a brief little video and then fill information. Okay. The guided notes may have pictures, may have equations, may have parts of equations, all sorts of things. There's lots of different ways that you can have students interact with guide notes. Cornell method. I love the Cornell method as well. Okay. I'm going to stay here for a second because I have a lot of questions here about links and guided notes. I will make sure I get those to you. And if we run out of time today, I will make sure that the folks at Patton have it and can send it out to you. Okay. Something to think about with note taking is when you reflect, it's like, okay, well, what do I do for note taking? Is it working? Are students benefiting from it? And are there ways that I can maybe potentially make it more effective or support student learning in different ways. Okay, it should really be purposeful and with intent. Okay. Games. We're going to talk about games next. And again, look I saw this as one of the things. This is the only specific game I think I'm mentioning because there are so many different games out there. There's so many different platform games out there. You can do Quizlet, you can do survey things, you can do in Google, and you can do whatever works for you. But I am going to toss this one out here. It is you can do the free version. Okay, that works for the classroom. It's a quiz game. But one of the things I don't like, and remember, I'm a special ed background. So like some of the kids that I work with, even if they're accurate, they may be slower. They may make more mistakes. And so when you have those games that it's like, oh, this student did all of this and got all of these correct in this amount of time, and this student only did this, like it's pretty overt, like this hierarchy of who the smartest person is in the class. And I don't like that. I don't like that at all. Okay. This Blue-Kit, and feel free to, as I'm talking, go onto the website, bluekit.com, and check it out. So much fun. Yeah, and the timed ones are really hard too. This can still be timed or it can be points, but it's different. So it's a quiz game. It's free version. Students, and this is what I love, students move at their own pace. Okay, so every student, rather than the question is on the board and you have 10 seconds to type in the correct response, it's moving at your own pace. You're getting your question on your screen. Students are doing it. You can have them work in partners. When I was in third grade a few weeks ago, we did them as partners. You can assign them as homework, and it's a game as homework. You can share and borrow. So like I have my own site, and I created a lot with schema-based instruction, like what type of schema is this? And so you can find that and use that. You can input it from Excel. It's so user-friendly, but it does have that competition element, but some of it's luck. Okay, it's not just, oh, this is the fastest student in the classroom, and this is the student that made the most mistakes, but there's a little bit of luck in there as well. Okay, I love that people are kind of singing this praises or adding other things as well. You can also see, so students can put their own, pick their own name. I do this as a review with my college students, and it gets intense. It is very fun, but it gets intense. Oh man, there's hacks for Blue-Kit, I think it's called. Yeah. Okay. So if you haven't used this, check it out. I've seen it being used successfully at college and high school and elementary school. I introduced it to my kiddo's third grade teacher, and the class went wild for it. Okay. It's a great way you could do it a few minutes at the beginning of the class, a few minutes at the end of class, fill it in. They do it on fun Fridays, things like that. Okay. I told you, that's the only one that I was going to throw out here. There's so many other ones. And if you have a game that you love, drop it in the chat, especially if it's a free game or free for teachers. Okay. Manipulatives. And I'm not going to go into manipulatives a lot because there's going to be other presentations that talk about manipulatives. Oh my gosh. And I think tomorrow morning, Brad Witzel is doing the using visuals in secondary math class. So if you really want to get into how to use visuals and manipulatives, tomorrow from 9:30 to 10:45, go to Brad Witzel's thing. Okay. And Brad is also the keynote tomorrow. So he always has such wonderful things to share. I always, whenever I listen to him, have my notepad out and I just write those things down. Oh yeah. But what I do want to throw out here, and this is probably more of a plug for Brad than it is a part of this presentation, is using algebra tiles. My elementary teachers, I always see manipulatives in the classroom, middle school some, and then high school, I don't see manipulatives as much. And I'd love to see it more because it really does help with those abstract concepts. And Sarah Powell has so many wonderful videos about how to use manipulatives in the secondary level. That's another link that I will drop at the end of this session. Okay. Here are some manipulatives. You may hear it called CRA, concrete representational abstract, or concrete semi-concrete representational abstract. The one thing that I'm going to kind of toss out here. Oh, excellent. Thanks for sharing that, Mary. And I was at fault for this. I would call it a sequence, even though it's not exactly a sequence. Like we talk about moving from like these representation to the abstract element, but they overlap. Okay, it's not like I am only going to use manipulatives and then I'm only going to have students draw pictures and now I'm only going to have students write numbers. It's really got to be more fluid in interacting and making those connections. Okay. Todd, I'm hoping that some patent folks can talk about that, but I have here 8:15 to 9:15 keynote, Brad. But we can take care of that. Okay. Here's another way to kind of work with manipulatives. These are virtual manipulatives. There's so many virtual manipulatives on here as well too that are free. And what I like about this is this shares the dialogue to go around with it. Okay. Here are cool virtual manipulatives. These I'd say are probably more for my elementary folks, but it could get into middle school. Toy theater, you have a bunch of, and again, if you want to hop onto toy theater right now to kind of look at what's there, go for it. But you have lots of manipulatives that students can use. Excellent. Thank you for continuing to drop those resources in. Okay. So that leaves 15 minutes before the end of the session. I threw a lot of things out there and I wanted to make sure we had time and space for questions, thoughts, comments, things you wanted to share. So I'm going to open it up for that. I will also make sure that I drop those two links into the chat that I promised. So let me stop sharing my screen for a moment. What questions, comments, thoughts, challenges do you have? What are some barriers to learning with this? And again, I threw a lot of ideas out there that I think you can incorporate into classes, ways to engage students. Oh, excellent. So Rachel said manipulatives can easily turn into toys. What I used to do when I taught fourth grade is I would just give them a few minutes to play with them. And then that was it. The other thing to kind of think about is if it's becoming toys, I mean, maybe the novelty wore off. Maybe you can use more boring manipulatives. I should say that kind of tongue in cheek, but you can do popsicle sticks. Popsicle sticks make fabulous manipulatives. It doesn't have to be like little cute, colorful things. Those craft sticks can be great. Okay. Bob and can you help me kind of manage and handle some of these questions?
Yes. Looking for some themes here. Um, and I want to they coming in quickly, which is
Yeah.
awesome. People are here, they're engaged and appreciating you. Um,
So I'm gonna actually, so I see one from Bonnie that I can address and then one from Todd right underneath that. And this may go into Donna's as well. Hello, Donna. By the time students get to high school, yeah, what I say is, and I say this in a very like sarcastic way, but like by high school, like we've taught students they're not good at math. Like we've taught them they're not mathematicians. And so we have to break that. And I would I would recommend for that, go back to those manipulatives, go back to that concept, go back to, and we know, what students struggle with a lot. They struggle with fractions. They struggle with those rational numbers. They struggle with fluency. Amanda Vanderhayden talks a lot about that and building students' fluency. So we need to simultaneously kind of work with those core skills and teach those core skills and teach students that they can be successful, and then connect into those algebra tiles and making algebra meaningful. Using authentic examples is a great way to do it, or having authentic experiences. I just worked with sixth graders and they were making word problems. We taught them schemas so that they could teach them to third graders. And that side benefit was now those sixth graders who are struggling with word problems understand those schemas, but they're showing it in a different way. So I think I don't have a quick answer to that because it's difficult, and a lot of students have learned that they don't like math. And so we need to, at the elementary level, the middle school level, kind of try to address that. But I would try to give them elements for success. Or if you kind of look at self-regulated strategy development, there are some interventions with SRSD, which is again self-regulated strategy development, and that looks at also that affect, Donna, that you're talking about, the goal setting, the monitoring, positive self-talk. You can monitor, or you can model positive self-talk, model what happens when you get frustrated and you're problem solving, and then give students opportunities for success and seeing them as successful and making connections.
Thank you, Dr. Hughes. To summarize, a lot of it seems to be around the explicit instruction around the math manipulatives in the secondary math classroom.
Yeah.
And how to perhaps create a culture or an intentionality with the use of them might summarize quite a few of the comments.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, first of all, I will say definitely go to Brad's thing tomorrow. So definitely shout out to that. I'm going to, right before I get to that, I do want to address Todd's question, because I think that I have a simple answer for that. If in Heads Together, if the person does not have an answer, you can give them another minute time. You can, what I used to do too when teaching, if you want to give them heads up, hey, I'm going to be calling on you. Okay, so make sure that you know what to say. Maybe you teach the students to write down an answer, so therefore they're reading the answer as opposed to just like coming up with the words on their own. So either have them write down an answer, write down keywords, or give a student who may have a little processing challenges heads up. They can phone a friend, they can put their heads together again and come up with an answer. So I think depending on the situation, that's probably what I would do. But if you're really concerned about that, I would have them write down their response, or have somebody write down the response, and so anybody can read it. And then some of your students may not have to read it. They can just add to it. Okay, so explicit instruction with manipulatives. I think one of the challenges with manipulatives is we we show students how to do it, and then we really jump to the abstract level or jump to the independent level too quickly. So one of the things that I would recommend is really engaging with that modeling. And I'm trying to pull up my PowerPoint again to share my screen, because I'll show you the script that was on one of the slides. Okay. Okay. So here, and I'll give you a moment to read this yourself. And I think this is from a publication. Oh, there we go, from Bach et al. 2021, and I can get this reference for you as well. And in here, they're talking about using virtual manipulatives. And so they're sharing this verbal think aloud. And this would be modeling what you would say. So that metacognitive talk, that teacher talk about what's happening, talking about the problem, what you want to do, and then how you're going to show it with manipulatives. The one thing that this verbal think aloud does not include, and I'm guessing it probably has to do with time and space and like what's required for the publication, but it's the student response in there. So what I would when I think about this, I would probably fit in places to ask students questions, to keep them engaged, to have things like that. You may want to model it yourself without having students use the manipulatives, especially if you're using virtual manipulatives. You can have the students have their computers closed. You can have if you're using physical manipulatives, off to the side. Students can't open them yet, or they haven't opened those yet. So you're modeling how to do this. You're showing that talk. You're not just moving the manipulatives, but you're explaining what's happening while you're doing this. So I might say with my problem, 2x minus 2 equals 6. Well, so 2x minus 2 is the same as 6. I need to balance that, but I want to get my numbers, the constants on one side and my variable on the other. Okay, class, what do I want to do? And the students could be like, get constants on one side, variables on the other side. Okay, 2x is a variable, 2 and 6 are numbers. What's the variable? What's the variable that I'm going to try to isolate and get on one side? Students can use the response, should say 2x, tell you 2x, any of those kind of things. So you're doing this, and you're doing this a few times, and then you're moving towards more of that guided practice where you're asking students more, well, what's happening next question? Okay, so now this is where I'm just going to use a stamp. Let's just see. Oh, let's try drawing. Okay, I'm right here at this area. So when you move to the guided practice, you might say, okay, now I have 2x equals 8. I want to get x by itself. So what's my next step? Who can talk me through the next step? Okay, so when we get to the guided practice, students are doing more. Or everybody, write down on your board what the next step is and hold it up for me. Excellent. Student Y, can you tell me what the next step is? Okay. What do we do after that? So you're giving students more opportunities to kind of lead the discourse and lead the discussion before you work to independent. And I've closed my chat. So I'm hoping that this kind of gives a little bit more information and a little more insight into that modeling. I did have a few questions, like if the students play with them, give students a few minutes to play with the manipulatives. Okay. I mean, that's what I used to do, kind of get it out of your system. And I tell them, okay, you've got like 3 minutes, play with them, and then we're going to get them out of your system. Or you can do partner work. You can have students sitting close to you, have students coming up to the board. There's lots of different ways that you can engage students with that as well. Okay. Bob, other questions?
Well, and I could not agree with you more. And just because you have Bob Shields in your class, and I tend to build sculptures, not a reason to not use a research-based, evidence-based best practice in the math classroom. So appreciate all of that. We have 3-ish minutes left. Anything to wrap up? There was a question about the website. We want to make sure we get that. There, boom. I crushed it. Miss Moyer coming in hot. The any last statements in closing, and then we'll share the code, the exit code. But any last thoughts from you, Dr. Hughes, before we close out this one particular session?
Well, first of all, thank you again. Thanks for spending time with me and staying with me. I am super excited to see all the ideas that you shared. Please feel free to email me. My email is on that last page of the handout. And I will, Bob, it's probably easiest for me to get those resources to you. Can you send them out to folks?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I will make sure those links, those websites, those resources, I will make sure that Bob has them. I'm also, if it's okay with you, I'm willing to stay on a few extra minutes if
Oh,
folks have.
absolutely. I'll share the code. We'll stop the recording, but people can stay on. That's
Okay,
that's very generous of you. So
awesome.
with that, I would like to offer a very sincere thank you to Dr. Hughes. This was awesome. Appreciate you sharing of your time and talents. Also, thank you to all of you who are spending your very valuable time with us today. Very much so appreciated.